Let's dive right in. Today, we're looking at an incredibly comprehensive strategic roadmap proposal developed for Waymo by the AI research firm Disruptivity. This explainer breaks down exactly how Waymo could and frankly should strategize from this year straight into the long-term future. We're talking about deep, prospective future scenarios for their market. So let's pull back the curtain and analyze the strategy. Here's the roadmap for today's explainer. We'll start with the autonomous inflection point, then look at the limits of fleet ownership and break down the infrastructure pivot. After that, we'll get into the universal intelligence layer, monetizing the ecosystem, and finally, the future of transit.
Starting with Section 1, the autonomous inflection point, marking that crucial transition from R&D into actual market dominance.
According to this analysis from Disruptivity, Waymo has already successfully navigated those early experimental days of autonomous development. They aren't just running cute proof-of-concept tests anymore. Instead, they're executing what the report explicitly calls a systemic land grab for urban transit infrastructure, aggressively laying the groundwork for the prospective strategy in the coming years. Now, there is a totally fascinating contrast here between Waymo's public PR and their actual operational reality. Their stated mission is just to be the world's most trusted driver. Very friendly, right? But if you look beneath that smooth consumer messaging, their operational cadence reveals a much sharper, highly aggressive intent to literally dominate the foundational layer of global mobility. To give you a sense of their current market dominance, Waymo is operating at 500,000 weekly paid trips currently. And looking at the trajectory, they will most likely reach tens of millions in the long-term future. By pushing into major metropolitan hubs and onto highways, they're validating something absolutely crucial. Consumers are totally ready to embrace autonomous mobility as an on-demand service, rather than dealing with the massive headaches and liabilities of owning a private car. But that ambition hints a wall, which brings us to Section 2, limits of fleet ownership and the severe bottlenecks of vertical integration. When we really scrutinize the constraints of their current business model, the limits of your fleet ownership become completely obvious. Right now, Waymo carries the immense, back-breaking capital and operational burden of owning, maintaining, and housing every single physical vehicle in their fleet. That vertically integrated model is a huge bottleneck for generalized global deployment. If they want unconstrained growth, they desperately need to pivot to a capital-light architecture. On top of that, there is a serious resilience bottleneck. The strategy report highlights systemic vulnerabilities like shifting regulations, operational limits in bad weather, and the massive financial drain of having to retrofit existing consumer vehicles. Simply put, this direct-to-consumer robotaxi model is just way too fragile and way too asset-heavy to scale infinitely on its own. So what's the fix? Section 3. The infrastructure pivot, moving from a fleet operator to an infrastructure provider. To survive and actually win the upcoming era of mobility, Disruptivity outlines a non-negotiable strategic pivot. Waymo basically has to blow up its current strategic identity. Instead of just operating as a direct-to-consumer robotaxi service, their prospective strategy demands they transform into a diversified business-to-business mobility infrastructure provider. Let's look at how this evolution plays out over time. In the short term, they just need to defend and scale their profitable operations in geofenced areas. Medium term is about hardening operational resilience and really deepening ties with manufacturers. But the long-term future? That is all about shifting the heavy balance sheet burden of physical vehicle ownership over to third-party manufacturers, which allows Waymo to just sit back and generate incredibly high-margin software licensing fees. This whole shift is perfectly timed to capitalize on mobility as a service. We are talking about a fundamental shift away from owning your own car towards mobility provided entirely as an on-demand utility. Waymo wants to disrupt the legacy auto sector by selling miles, not hardware. For you and me, this signals the eventual end of buying, insuring, and finding parking for a personal vehicle. And the key to making that happen is Section 4, the universal intelligence layer, or what we can call the Intel Inside strategy for mobility. Disruptivity hits the nail on the head here, framing this as an Intel Inside model for the automotive industry. It's a perfect analogy. The ultimate goal is for the Waymo driver to become the invisible, ubiquitous brain that powers totally diverse third-party fleets across the entire globe. That is the core of their future transit scenarios. So how do they actually pull this off? Step 1, they build a hardware-agnostic software development kit. Step 2, they abstract all their complex perception and planning software away from any specific vehicle's chassis.
And finally, step 3, they enable major manufacturing partners to integrate this autonomy straight into the factory production lines. By decoupling the software from the physical car, the Waymo driver just becomes a modular operating system.
This is a game changer because this asset-light licensing architecture empowers their partners to build purpose-built, steering wheel-less robotaxis from scratch. This instantly expands Waymo's operational footprint, accelerating them right toward those tens of millions of rides we talked about, all without Waymo holding on to the massive hardware risk.
Once you have that architecture, how do you make money? That's Section 5, monetizing the ecosystem by decoupling revenue from passenger transport.
This requires a total overhaul of their revenue streams. Currently, Waymo's money comes almost entirely from direct passenger fares, which means revenue is totally capped by how many physical cars they can manage. The future ecosystem model fixes this. It mandates decoupling revenue from moving people, pivoting instead to high-margin, recurring software-as-a-service licensing and massive network orchestration fees.
And crucially, this widens their customer base in a massive way. The Waymo platform won't just be for consumer rides. We're talking original equipment manufacturers, third-party logistics providers, municipal transit networks, ride-hailing partners, and huge enterprise delivery fleets. They are literally positioning themselves to be the operating system for global logistics.
Which brings us to our final point, Section 6, the future of transit and redefining urban mobility. When we zoom out and look at these future scenarios, Waymo is completely reframing its corporate narrative. In the past, the core objective was just replacing human drivers, basically trying to solve an incredibly complex robotics problem. But according to Disruptivity's analysis, the future is about fundamentally augmenting urban transit capacity through a ubiquitous mobility infrastructure. They aren't just building cars, they're reshaping how our cities function from the ground up.
So as we wrap up this explainer, I want you to think about this. When the Waymo driver finally becomes the invisible underlying infrastructure behind global transit, just like the OS on your phone, how is that going to completely redefine the way you navigate the world outside your door? Thanks for hanging out with me today. Keep questioning the future.